There was a distinct smell along the Checo River in July, brackish water, green marsh, and a faint trace of diesel from the boats at the dock. I knew that smell by heart. I was standing in my parents' driveway, breathing it in when my father handed me an envelope. He never actually said, "Don't come to your sister's wedding." Instead, he smiled awkwardly and said, "Elsie, why don't you take a little trip this weekend? Gold Beach is beautiful this time of year." Then he placed $2,500 in my hand. I counted the money slowly. I wanted him to see me doing it. "It's Rosalind's wedding, Dad." "I know whose wedding it is." He looked away toward his truck and the gutters he still hadn't cleaned. Through the kitchen window, I saw my mother, Serafina, rearranging cans in the pantry. She always did that when she wanted to avoid a difficult conversation. Then Dad lowered his voice. "The Thorns are flying people in. Alister's family from Sacramento, Seattle. You understand what this means for us?" I understood perfectly. Alister Thorn owned Checo Heritage Trust, the bank whose name appeared on half the buildings downtown and countless boats in the harbor. Years ago, my father had captained one of those boats. He eventually had to sell it after taking a loan from the same bank. Now Alister Thorn's son, Cassius, was marrying my sister in 3 days. And apparently, I was the family embarrassment they didn't want appearing in the wedding photos. Dad sighed. "They think we're respectable people. Educated. Put together. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Elsie. Just be somewhere else this weekend. Come back Monday." I wanted to throw the envelope back at him. Instead, I folded it, slipped it into my pocket and said, "Okay, Dad." He looked relieved. What he didn't know was that by Monday morning, Checo Heritage Trust would announce its new majority shareholder. That shareholder would be me. To understand how I ended up owning the bank that had financed my father's boat, you have to go back 6 years. When I turned 18, I left for Portland State. Nobody in my family celebrated. Rosalind had attended Stanford, so my state school education was something my parents preferred not to discuss. I studied finance. My father treated that choice like I had failed to find something better. After graduation, I joined a small investment firm on the Portland waterfront. It wasn't glamorous, but my mentor, Corwin Holloway, taught me something important. Look where everyone else refuses to look. He specialized in small regional banks, family-run institutions that Wall Street ignored because they weren't exciting enough. One of those banks was Checo Heritage Trust. I had grown up under its sign. I had watched its lights come on every evening from the passenger seat of my father's truck. I knew its history, so I started buying. I created a holding company called Siskiyou Coastal Holdings, a name intentionally dull enough that nobody would pay attention. Every bonus went into it. Every raise. Every dollar I could save. I lived cheaply, wore the same sweaters for years, and kept my spending low. Corwin once told me, "Real conviction doesn't need applause." I took his advice. For 6 years I stayed quiet. I watched the filings. I studied the bank. I bought shares whenever the opportunity appeared. By the time Rosalind became engaged to Cassius Thorn, Siskiyou Coastal Holdings already controlled nearly 40% of Checo Heritage Trust. Then that spring, an elderly Thorn family relative in Coos Bay decided she wanted cash instead of keeping her inherited shares. He sold them. Through a broker who had absolutely no idea who was buying. By April, I had enough shares to become the bank's majority owner. The board finally discovered who stood behind Siskiyou Coastal Holdings. They called a private meeting. I sat across from 6 board members in a room that smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. Then I calmly explained exactly what I planned to do with my position. None of them knew the woman sitting across the table was the daughter of the man who still used their drive-thru every other Friday. And my father certainly had no idea. By Monday morning, everyone would know. The daughter they had tried to hide from the Thorns was about to become the person they had to answer to. The board asked me to delay the public announcement until after my sister's wedding. I agreed. I told them I didn't want to complicate a family celebration. That was a lie. I wanted to see my father's face when he discovered that the daughter he had paid $2,500 to disappear now owned the bank his new son-in-law's family had spent 3 generations building. So I went to Gold Beach, about 30 miles north on Highway 101. In the July fog, it felt like another world, quiet, gray, and completely removed from whatever was happening back home. I checked into a small motel overlooking the Rogue River. The room had an ancient coffee maker, a worn bedspread, and exactly the kind of furniture nobody wanted to remember. That Saturday night, I sat outside under a spare blanket and watched the boats return through the jetty. 30 miles away, my family was celebrating my sister's wedding without me. I expected to feel hurt. Instead, I felt strangely calm. It was like standing on a diving board just before the jump. The moment when everything is still and you know your life is about to change. I heard about the wedding afterward. It was held on a beautiful bluff overlooking the Pacific. White chairs lined the lawn, and a string quartet struggled against the coastal wind. Rosalind wore a dress that I later learned cost more than my used Honda Civic. My mother told everyone I had an unavoidable work commitment. My father told the Thorns that I was the practical one. He left the sentence unfinished, allowing people to assume whatever they wanted. They didn't assume anything flattering. Cassius admitted that to me weeks later. Then Monday arrived. At exactly 9 a.m. Checo Heritage Trust released a short public announcement. That afternoon the local newspaper ran the headline. Local bank names new majority shareholder. Elsie Van Try of Siskiyou Coastal Holdings joins board. ****. My phone started ringing at 9:04. It wasn't my father. It was Cassius. I ignored him 3 times before answering. "Elsie," he said carefully. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." "There hasn't." A long silence followed. "My father is meeting with the board right now," he said. "He's not doing well." "I imagine he isn't. You could have told us before the wedding." "I could have." I paused. "But nobody invited me, Cassius. Someone handed me $2,500 and asked me to be somewhere else." He had nothing to say to that. We ended the call. He called again. Then again. By Tuesday I stopped counting. Wednesday evening my father finally called. I wish I could say he apologized. He didn't. "You could have warned us," he said. "Warned you about what?" "About this." "You didn't want to be warned, Dad. You wanted me gone." Silence. "You asked me to leave because you were embarrassed by me. That's very different from asking me to warn you about what I was building." He didn't respond. For years I had mistaken his silence for regret. Now I understood it differently. He wasn't softening. He was calculating. He was trying to figure out what I was worth to him now. That was one of the hardest lessons I ever learned. Some people don't change their opinion of you. They simply change their math. ****. 3 weeks later I attended my first board meeting. It was held in the same building on Chetco Avenue that I had walked past countless times as a child. This time my name was on the table. Alister Thorn was there. He shook my hand stiffly as if even that simple gesture required effort. My father wasn't in the room. He hadn't been invited. For the first time, I understood exactly what it felt like to be excluded from the other side. My sister Rosalind called me later that week. It was the first time she'd called since her engagement. She didn't exactly apologize. Instead she asked quietly, "Are you going to sell your shares and leave?" "No," I told her. "I'm staying." Brookings was still my home. But I wasn't going to keep making myself smaller just to fit into my family's idea of what was respectable. Things with my parents didn't suddenly become perfect. We still had Sunday dinners. My father still asked about the bank sometimes, carefully choosing his words. I answered honestly. I didn't make things harder than necessary. But I stopped making them easier for him too. That was the real change. I finally stopped paying for my father's comfort with my own disappearance. My father had spent years measuring my worth against a version of success he could brag about to his friends. He never bothered to ask what I might be building quietly on my own. And while everyone was busy deciding I wasn't good enough, I kept working. 6 years of saving. 6 years of studying. 6 years of quiet decisions. No applause. No family support. Just patience and conviction. Because respect isn't something you get from being included on a wedding guest list. And success doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly in a small apartment over cheap coffee, while everyone else is looking in the opposite direction. Then one Monday morning the numbers change. And suddenly the people who once asked you to disappear are forced to look directly at you.